The year was 1942. The world had been engulfed in war for more than 2 years. From the beaches of Normandy to the deserts of North Africa, from the Siberian forests to the islands of the Pacific, the thunder of bombs never ceased. The earth itself seemed to have turned into a single vast battlefield. After the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States had officially entered the war. In one night, a nation that had long stood neutral became the very center of the storm. Factories that once produced automobiles now forged tanks. Shipyards sprang up along the coasts. Millions of young Americans left their homes, donned green uniforms, and boarded ships bound for distant horizons. In Europe, the war still leaned heavily in one direction. Germany controlled nearly the entire continent. Each day, Berlin radio announced new victories. But behind the triumphant voices of propaganda, exhaustion spread through the ranks. Adolf Hitler believed that conquering the Soviet Union would end the war within the year. He did not yet understand that he was about to meet the greatest enemy of his life, the Russian winter. In the summer of 1942, Germany launched its assault on Stalingrad, the city that bore the name of the Soviet leader. It was not only a strategic target, but a symbol. To capture Stalingrad would mean to crush the spirit of an entire nation. German tank divisions rolled into the southern steppes. The ground trembled. The sky was thick with smoke and fire.
Need to find somewhere safe.
Thousands of civilians were trapped inside the city, unable to flee. As German troops entered Stalingrad, every building became a battlefield. Each floor was a front line. Soldiers fought among rubble, smoke, blood, and screams. They called it the Battle of Every Brick. Soviet soldiers had no way to retreat. They fought with everything they could find: grenades, knives, stones, even their bare hands. One young soldier wrote in his diary, "I no longer know if it is day or night. Everything is smoke. Everything is shouting. But I know this: if we retreat, this country will no longer exist." When winter arrived, Stalingrad became a frozen nightmare. Temperatures dropped below 40 degrees Celsius below zero. German troops had no winter uniforms, no fuel, no supplies. Tanks froze solid in the snow. More soldiers died of cold than from bullets. In February 1943, the remnants of the German army were encircled. Over 300,000 men were taken prisoner. The Battle of Stalingrad was over, and with it, Hitler's dream of European domination. For the first time in World War II, the Allied powers had achieved a decisive victory. A faint glimmer of hope flickered amid the sea of fire. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the war in the Pacific raged. After Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces advanced relentlessly, seizing islands and American bases. But the United States recovered faster than anyone imagined. In June 1942, at the Battle of Midway, 4 Japanese aircraft carriers were sunk in 4 days. It was Japan's first major defeat, and it changed the entire course of the Pacific War. One surviving American pilot recalled, "When I looked down and saw the ocean on fire, I knew history had turned. We had repaid the debt of Pearl Harbor." The world began to tilt toward a fragile balance. In North Africa, British General Montgomery defeated the German forces of Erwin Rommel at El Alamein. Across the Pacific, American forces began their counteroffensive, launching an operation called island hopping. Each island, each patch of sand, was won at a terrible cost in blood. American soldiers fought on blazing beaches between waves and bullets. Japanese soldiers waited in bunkers, ready to die rather than surrender. Each battle was a tragedy. At Guadalcanal, on moonless nights, black as ink, soldiers on both sides were only meters apart. They could hear each other breathing, hear the wind cutting through torn flags. No one spoke. No one slept. They waited for the first gunshot. When dawn came, the ground was covered with bodies. No one truly knew what they were fighting for anymore. Land, honor, or simply another day of life. During those years, war was not confined to the front lines. It reached into every home. In America, mothers and wives worked in factories, welding steel and assembling bullets. They were known as Rosie the Riveter, a symbol of women's strength in wartime. In the Soviet Union, elderly women dug shelters, children carried water to soldiers, farmers plowed fields under falling bombs. War was no longer the story of armies, it was the story of all humanity. In the occupied cities, life continued under fear. Citizens lived beneath the shadows of red flags marked with the black swastika. Midnight knocks on doors, the echo of boots on cobblestones, and trains that carried people away, never to return. By 1943, the world had begun to shift. The Allies were gaining momentum. German forces were pushed back in the east. Japan was losing control at sea. But the price of victory was staggering. Stalingrad, 2 million dead. Midway, thousands lost beneath the waves. Alamein, desert sands covering unmarked graves. Humanity was paying with an entire generation. In Europe, as German troops retreated, they left behind charred cities and silent lands. In Asia, as Japanese forces withdrew, they burned everything, leaving nothing but ashes. Orphaned children, mothers driven mad, rivers red with blood. Humanity had never seen destruction on this scale. Yet, amid the ruins, hope endured. Nations that were once divided began to cooperate. The Soviet Union, the United States, and Britain, the three, met for the first time in Tehran. There, they laid the foundation for the greatest counteroffensive in history, the plan to open a second front in Europe. The world was preparing for D-Day, the day that would decide the fate of humanity. But before the Allied ships could land on the beaches of Normandy, the war would still claim millions of other lives. In Stalingrad, the snow had melted, but the soil was still soaked with blood. In the Pacific, the waves were still stained with ashes. In Africa, the wind still swept across rusted guns half buried in sand. The fighting continued, but everyone could feel that something had changed. The balance of power was shifting. People began to believe that victory was possible, though no one yet knew when or at what cost. One night, at the end of 1943, in bomb-scarred London, an elderly woman stood at her window. She looked at the dark sky and whispered softly, "Perhaps, after all this, we will learn how to live again." No one heard her, yet her words seemed to echo across Europe. It was not just a wish for Britain, but for all humankind. As that winter closed, the world had endured 3 years of war, 3 years of loss, of blood, of tears. 3 years to realize that no one truly wins in war, only those who survive to tell the tale. But they did not yet know that the bloodiest chapter of World War II was still ahead. It would come at Normandy, at Berlin, at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war was about to enter its final phase, a phase where humanity would have to choose between destruction and rebirth. As the sun rose over the ruined city of Stalingrad, a young soldier lifted his head toward the smoky sky. He smiled faintly and whispered, "We are still alive." Those words were not just his. They belonged to the entire world after 3 years of hell. The world had endured enough. Now all eyes turned west, toward the shores where the doors of freedom were about to be opened once more. And as the waves of Normandy began to echo across the horizon, history